Hello and welcome to our web conference, Create Better Understanding Through Active Listening with Pamela Jett.
We all know that listening is a very important part of success in any area, personal and professional. And most of us know how to listen. However, many of us are sabotaging our success because we are not consciously working to create better understanding and shared meaning through active listening. In order to improve our ability to listen actively, it is important to have a good working definition of active listening. And one of my favorite definitions of active listening is the act of mindfully hearing and attempting to comprehend the meaning of words spoken by another in a conversation or speech. Active listening is an important business communication skill, and it can involve making sounds that indicate attentiveness, as well as the listener giving feedback in the form of a paraphrased rendition of what has been said by the other party for their confirmation. Now, there are several key components of this definition that merit attention. The first is the notion that it is an act. Active listening is not passive. It is not the same as hearing. Active listening is something that requires effort and energy. It is an act. It is an action. And while this may sound, no duh, that's why it's active listening, how many of us know someone who thinks they are a great listener simply because they can hear? Or we know someone who will say, I'm listening, when their actions send a completely different message. For example, you may know someone who listens and checks their email at the same time. Active listening is indeed an action. The second key component of this definition is the word mindful. From my perspective, that is another way of saying deliberate, intentional, and self-aware. Active listeners are aware that they are engaged in active listening. It's not an accident. It is a choice. The third, or the next key component of this definition, is the notion that active listening involves feedback, sounds, paraphrasing. These are the common actions associated with active listening. Throughout this program, we will be discussing how you can make the most of these actions and many others to improve relationships, productivity, and success. So here are some tools to assist you in understanding and using the keys to active listening. And as we go through these keys, it is important to engage in some form of self-check. Many of these keys will not be news to you. The question isn't, am I aware of these keys? The question is, am I using these keys? Most of us know how to be a great listener. However, we aren't always engaged in being a great or an active listener. So here's key number 1. Be teachable, humble, open to learning. The people who make the worst listeners are those that they think they know it all already, that they don't need to listen, or that they've heard it all before. I've long held the belief that most people don't have a listening problem. We have an ego problem. We're prideful. And if we think we don't have anything to learn, we are more likely to shut down or engage in pseudo-listening. Pseudo-listening is when we look like we're listening, but internally we're creating our grocery list or some other activity. In contrast, when we are teachable or humble, we are far more likely to engage in active listening because we have the mindset that we have something to learn. Which leads us to key number 2. Listening is not the same as hearing. As we discussed earlier, many of us will say we are listening when all we're doing is hearing. Hearing refers to our physical ability, and listening is an emotional and social ability. So now let's talk about key number 3. Listening is a skill that can be improved. Even the very best listeners among us can always become better listeners. Some of us have what noted researcher Carol Dweck calls a fixed mindset. By a fixed mindset, she means that some of us think that the way we, or others for that matter, are pretty much the way we are. Meaning that, well, we are the way we are and we can't really change or get any better. In stark contrast, some of us have a growth mindset. A growth mindset means that we recognize that no matter what our natural gifts, talents, and strengths are, there is always room for improvement or growth. And having the growth mindset means that improvement or growth is possible. I remember when I was in graduate school working on my PhD, there was a wonderful 80-year-old woman in one of my graduate seminars. She was 80, and she was still learning and growing. She was a fabulous example of someone who possesses a growth mindset. With respect to listening, the growth mindset individual knows that it's possible to be better, and they actively seek out opportunities to learn and grow. I applaud you for participating in this event because participating is evidence of a growth mindset. And last but not least, we have key number 4. Key number 4 is knowing that listening is critical to success in every area of our lives. While our focus today is on the professional environment, the same active listening skills at work can also work at home. With respect to our professional environment, research is very clear that the higher up the corporate or organizational ladder you go, the more critical your listening skills become. Great leaders are typically great listeners. They understand the previous keys, and they use the knowledge they gain by active listening to not only gather more and better information, they use active listening to help those they lead feel valued and respected. The bottom line is active listening enhances productivity, increases problem solving, reduces turnover, and improves employee engagement.